press. I'm awfully sorry.
Okay, seems to be an error of the mic. I want to remind the distinguished delegates that if you want to request for the floor, you request for the floor by pressing on the right hand button of the mic set in front of you. Right hand button. Don't flag your country flag up, but just press the right hand button of the mic system in front of you to request for the floor. So we shall proceed with today's business. Like I said, we have to catch up with business from yesterday. But before we do that, we were supposed to have Credentials Committee interim report, which we shall get this afternoon. And and there are proposed changes on the programming of working groups from the Bureau. I will request the Secretariat to update the meeting on the proposed changes on the scheduling of working groups, as well as other administrative issues before we get into substantive business. Secretariat.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I would just like to remind all delegates that they can send any statements as well as any comments that they make on documents during the course of today to the email address that's been projected onto the screen at the moment. The Bureau that met last night made a decision that for today at least they would trial having the Budget Committee only meeting at lunchtime and the working groups on species issues meeting only in the evening. This was to allow parties to be able to attend both the budget working group as well as species groups. And we will reassess the situation this evening in the Bureau to see if this system will work. So just to repeat, at lunchtime today, there will only be a budget committee meeting, and in the evening, the 3 species groups, working groups will meet. I would just like to also point out that there has been a revision to document 15.1 on the scientific, COP-appointed scientific councillors. That you will find online now document 15.1, add 1, rev 1. There's been an additional nomination for one of the new subject areas of COP-appointed councillors, so you may wish to already look for that document. I'd also like to remind those participants who are receiving funding from the Secretariat that today is the last day to collect your daily subsistence allowance from the small room across the foyer out here. Any DSA not collected today will be considered a contribution to the CMS Trust Fund, and we thank you very much. And with that, I'll pass back to the Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretariat. We shall now go into agenda item 13, which we started yesterday. I invite delegates to focus on document 13.2, which is budget for the next triennium, as well as the program of work for the next triennium. May I now invite the Secretariat to introduce document 13.2. Secretariat, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We have a PowerPoint, so I'm going to wait for that to get loaded up. But while we're doing that, I just want to paint the picture again from what you heard yesterday as well as in the documents, and just bring to your attention sort of where we are in terms of budget situation. So the first point is that, I was really pleased, having just come in as Executive Secretary, to hear all of the incredible support for the work of CMS, all of the excitement, all of the buzz. Even we had Prime Minister Modi speaking about species in a way that really moved me, and I don't know if everyone realized he was live, actually. It was not a videotape. So he took the time to be with us, even though it was remote. And the point is, without repeating everything, we are at this critical crossroads. We have seen the data, we've seen the science, and we're not keeping up. So the good news is, there's a tremendous wave of support and recognition of the importance of CMS. But the fact is, if we're going to be ready to sit at the table and do what we need to do, we're going to need your support. And that includes, of course, financial support. I also want to remind the room of the situation with arrears, because this is a real issue, again, constraining us. What arrears mean is that I need to be cautious about how we spend our money. So again, this is why we had actually I'm told we had less of a balance currently through 2019 than we've had in previous years, and yet that includes, for example, a P4 staff person, the head of our avian unit. I have not advertised that job because I did not want to advertise it and then see us going literally broke, which is where we were heading until we got some contributions last year. So the total number of arrears that we still have is 972,000 euros. It's a lot for us. And I just have to say that if we don't resolve that issue, we're not going to get out of this downward spiral. We'll just put a Band-Aid on it. So this is a serious issue, and I'm just from the podium here asking you to do whatever is possible to address those arrears, no matter how small they may be or large. The second point I want to make is, again, a thank you to those parties who have already paid their 2020 contributions. The speed, the early payment of those is absolutely critical. You've heard the new, not so new anymore, but the UN rules require that we have the money in the bank before we can make plans to spend it. We can't even enter into the contracts, let alone spend it, or advertise a job even, if we don't have the money. So that means that not having the money is putting a damper on our ability to deliver for you. So even if the intent is absolutely to pay the contribution, there's no issue about it. Having it early, having it by the deadline is so important, I can't tell you. So I'm imploring those of you who have not yet done so to please help us by doing what you need to do to get those payments, so we don't also have to spend staff time and our hours sort of following up, which also is not a great use of our resources. I also want to say, before I go into the details, that when you're running a secretariat, especially with respect to staff, but it also relates to program, it's kind of like a zero-sum gain. Because if you don't have enough staff in your core team, that means you're going to have to find a way to hire someone on the outside, either a contractor, a short-term a consultant. And to do that, it takes a lot of work. So it means that the the program officers have to think about the terms of reference. Then I have to sign off on it. Then we have to make sure we have the money. We have to fundraise for that position. The administrative team has to develop the terms of reference. We have to advertise it. We have to interview those people. We have to have a decision process, and then I have to sign it again. And that's before we even have anyone, on board. It's a lot of work. It is a big bureaucracy. So having the staff in place means you don't have to do all that. And it means instead we have people on the ground ready to go, and we can then free up all of that other time for other things, like raising money or securing more partners or what have you, that is much more efficient and effective for the convention. The final point I'll remind you of is that in my presentation yesterday on the implementation of the program of work for 2018 and 2019, we've only managed to secure 14% of the estimated total. Now, I checked with my team. I said, look, we need to be sure we don't inflate, the numbers of what it would cost. And I've been told, and for our next program of work as well, the costing is pretty conservative. So we're mindful of that. We're not trying to create some big number. And we're happy to explain where that data came from. So that's not a really terrific statistic if we only have 14% to do the work we have to do. The staffing is also related to that, because if we have core staff, we can actually do a lot of that work, and we count that. We don't then keep asking for the money. We say, oh, we account for that staff time against what we said we need. So, and I know that not every convention does that, having worked at least at one other one. So, with that, let me then present to you formally our proposal for the budget. If we can start the slides, there they are. Okay. Okay. It's hard for me to read, but I have my own script here. Okay. So, as I think you know, we have presented 4 scenarios. Before we presented this, we had already a preliminary proposal that we shared with the Budget Subcommittee, Budget and Finance Subcommittee, and the Standing Committee at the November meetings in Bonn. We spent a lot of time in those discussions, and this budget reflects the guidance and wisdom of those discussions from the parties that were there. The first scenario, I think I'll just, the first scenario, I think we'll skip the next 2 slides here. Okay. This is a 0 nominal growth scenario with respect to the current budget for the triennium. So what that means, again, is that we keep completely level with the budget that was approved at the last COP. So that number, it's 8,156,202 euros. What that means is that we only account for an increase. We have to account for the increase in salaries because we don't have control of that. It's a UN-wide salary scale, as well as 2% inflation just for posts. But the rest is flat, so we don't look at inflation for all the other budget items, and that's basically ignoring reality because, of course, there is inflation. So what that means is that we actually have to make cuts. So I just want to repeat that. If we go with a scenario 1 budget, it means we're actually reducing, and we have to find ways to reduce our spending. And that means looking at, for example, cutting certain activities or services that are provided, including, for example, meetings of our governing bodies or, other core things like paying for moving people to those meetings from the core budget. So a more realistic starting point is scenario 2, which is still not a significant change over the status quo, because what that does is it actually says we're not going to grow the budget, but we are going to account for inflation over all items. So it's basically being more realistic, saying inflation has happened, so therefore we have to account for it since our current day dollars are worth less than they were several years ago. Again, it keeps the current post, doesn't make any changes to that. It does make one increase, and that is what we believe is a very good investment in our staff. I've explained this a few times at the Standing Committee, both here and in Bonn. But the situation in Bonn, it's a fantastic work duty station there, and we're very grateful, of course, to the German government for hosting us. But the issue is a lot of the trainings for us are based out of UNEP, since that is our administrator for all of our finance and administrative things. UNEP is, of course, far from Bonn. They're based in Nairobi. So what that means is they do have offices in other places, Geneva, but they're not in Bonn, and that means to get training, we either send people to those locations or we have to pay a trainer to come to us. And we're looking at ways to keep the cost efficiencies strong by talking to our neighbors, looking to bring a trainer for all of us, but still it costs money. So we've put in what we think is a modest 10,000 euros per year for that purpose, and that's the sum total of scenario 2. So it has no increase of staff, no new activities, so it's not really much of an increase at all. So scenario 3 is where we actually start to propose some changes to be able to deliver on what you've asked us to do. Scenario 3 is where we add a few staffing positions and increase some positions that are half-time. I want to stress that my sort of philosophy is not to come in with some absolutely unrealistic proposal. I think it's not a good way to approach the parties and say, we need the sun, the moon, and the stars, and then some more. We need 5 new P staff, we need 20 new G staff. That's not what we're presenting to you. We had presented to the budget subcommittee and the standing committee more than we're presenting to you now. We had, because we do need more than what is presented here, but we wanted to be realistic and modest. So what we are asking for, in fact, is only 1 full-time P staff. We're talking about full-time increases, and 1 full-time G staff. The rest are half-time increases, mostly to existing posts, so there would be no need to create anything new, but taking positions that exist. We have people and can either increase the amount of time they work or bring in another half-time person against that post. Especially in the avian area, we do have a vacant P4 post, but that's all we have. There's only 1 P staff in the whole avian unit, and you've seen the agenda for avian. It's enormous, and I do love all the species, but I do consider myself at heart a bird nerd, and I really care that we have all the financing and staff we need for this agenda. So we do ask for a P2 post for that unit. The G posts are also extremely important. One of those is for support, actually for document preparation. We actually don't have someone who's an editor. We make do with different skill sets. We have great writers on the professional team, but you see all the documents we produce, and these are not just for you. It's also for all of the meetings that we have, all of the different MOU meetings that the Secretariat supports. So there's a lot of writing going on, and yet we don't have someone dedicated to that. And I think that would really help us deliver for you. Let's see. So the other point on this is that the P staff, I mean, we pretty thinly, we use support staff we use our G posts for double duty. So in some secretariats, you'll see a unit will have, let's say, 1 dedicated G staff who's helping with all of the logistics, all of the papers, all of the, the things you need to do to organize the many meetings that we have. But we only have a half a person at most, maybe a quarter, because the people helping the units on that have other jobs. They also are, for example, doing, all of the document production, not the editing, but all of the translation, all of, other administrative tasks. So we're already doing double duty, and that's why we're trying to get a little additional support there, because otherwise what happens is a zero-sum gain, again, because professional staff will have to start taking on more administrative duties than they would normally, and that's not a good use of their time. So we're really, again, trying to solve it with modest increases, only 1 P staff being requested, and filling part-time positions. I was joking, I should have brought a scenario 5, but we didn't. Oh, I went the wrong way. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So the last scenario is a new concept, I believe, but it is related to a situation from the past, which is in the past, I understand that we had actually, money in the budget, in the core budget, that was actually used for program. And it was used for things that are expected of us all the time. It's not like special projects or species meetings or studies. These are things that we're expected to do and produce for you regularly. And so what's happened because of our budget situation is we have no money to do that. We have zero for that. And so what we've done is prioritize for you some of the things that we think would merit inclusion in the budget as core for core funding for some central tasks that we have. The three things that we've included, and it's still, I believe, fairly modest for what we're talking about doing. The first is the analysis of national reports, which of course we have to do to be able to report to you and about how things are going. The second is something I've been talking about a lot, which is to be able to produce a state of the world's migratory species report as a flagship product of CMS. Now again, this to me has at least dual purposes, if not more. The first reason is it's essential. It's essential for the scientific basis of what we're doing. No one else is doing this report, so it doesn't exist. And when I came to CMS, I was really quite surprised that there was no such report produced. We don't need to do it internally. I mean, we shouldn't do it internally. We have partners who are able and ready to help us on this, but we need the funding. And we have not been able to raise that money despite a lot of effort. So this report would show not only the status of our species at the individual species level to see, how are they really doing? And if they're doing well, then we can talk about, well, maybe less focus on those species, or maybe they shouldn't, not stay on Appendix 1 or 2. That's a discussion for you. But we can bring that data to you. It would also say, well, this species is actually incredibly threatened, and we need to focus there. So it is actually a resource, a tool for us as well as providing the science. The second reason that it's important is for raising awareness. I mean, if we had such a report, we could then use it very effectively with the media, with governments, to show them what's happening on the ground. I also think it's important, we don't just think about the species. We do need to first focus, as the Scientific Council advised us, on our species that are listed. But there are also, I think we need to take into account, the broader situation and look at trends, et cetera, in terms of what species are also in trouble that we should be thinking about. So this is why it's so important that we have support for a flagship report. Finally, we suggest that we have some funding for outreach activities. And again, we have been very grateful to the different governments who've supported us through voluntary contributions for this. But again, it's not an easy way to operate a communications office with programs and ideas for campaigns, and all the ideas I'm bringing to the Secretariat now. And I see such an opportunity. I mean, we have the migratory species. No one else has species. We should be doing much more to reach people with what we have, and we need resources for that. So that's, again, we asked for 60,000 euros for that, which is, again, in my view, not a huge ask for all that we need to do. And I can assure you that we would work with as many partners as we can bring in to multiply that use. It's not just for internal use. So that is the conclusion of the scenarios part of the presentation. I'm now going to move to the scale of contributions. I'll go very quickly over this. So the first, of course, you're very familiar with, which is we have developed assessed contribution for the various budget scenarios based on the current UN scale of assessment for the triennium, and also adjusted for CMS membership. We have included two different ideas for your consideration in addition to that. The first is a proposal to include, we include two different options for minimum contributions. One for a minimum contribution of 1,000 euros and another for a minimum of 2,000 euros. The amount of money that would raise is in the documentation, so you can see, and obviously with the 2,000, it's more significant. And the reason for that is, in part, again, sort of cost efficiency. If there's a tiny little contribution. We have a lot of arrears actually in the small range. And through conversations we had in Bonn, it seemed that part of the problem was it's hard for our focal points to get the attention of their funders for a small amount. Just saying, look, we need €1,000, it's easier to make the case and get it through because it takes a lot of administrative costs. So we hope that you will consider those proposals. They have been used in Eurobats and in AIWA, so they've been tried and supported by parties. And lastly, we've also suggested that if also something happening with Eurobats, if there's interest, we could have parties supporting some of the operating costs, so not the program work, but the operating costs through a core budget contribution, which would be a voluntary contribution, but against that operating cost. Okay, now I move to more maybe the fun part, which is about the programming. And just one slide on this, and then I'll conclude. So the program of work between COP13 and COP14. Now, because we moved this COP early in the year, it has two implications for the program of work. The first is that we're just starting 2020, and so rather than leave that in the past triennium, we've folded that in. So all of the activities that we had planned to do or continue into 2020 are now in the new proposal. It also is because, depending on what the COP decides, most likely there'll be an interest to move our COP schedule towards the end of the year, which would mean that we would only meet again towards the end of 2023. So that actually means we have a long intercessional period, almost, let's say, 3.5 years. So it's going to be a long period for our work, which is in some ways is good, so we'll have more time to deliver, but that's why you'll see the proposal before you and sort of the levels that we've put in there. As I said, we tried to be conservative. The programmatic activities, obviously, but I'll say it, they focus only on programmatic activities, nothing else. And we do show you, we try to give a sense of what resources would we bring against those activities from both core and voluntary contributions. And finally, that program of work estimate is, of course, what we work from for our resource mobilization and requests. So finally, the last slide is the action requested is to adopt the draft resolution, including the budget, the scale of assessed contributions, and the program of work for the intercessional period between COP13 and COP14. And my last point will be we want to be fit for purpose and to do everything we can to fulfill CMS's role at a time when biodiversity is not doing well. And so I hope that you can help us to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Executive Secretary. You've had the proposed budget, both scenarios and methods of contribution, and as well as a summary of what is contained in the program of work. Mindful that we have a dedicated budget working group, I will open the floor for general comments on the budget, scenarios, scale of contribution, and program of work. General comments and strategic matters, knowing that specific issues will be discussed in the budget committee. I open the floor now. I recognize Uganda, followed by United Kingdom and Brazil. Uganda, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The Republic of Uganda, and indeed many other countries, we are deeply concerned about the proposal to introduce a minimum contribution to the budget. We believe that as members of the United Nations and CMS as an instrument managed by the United Nations should embrace and apply the UN scale of assessment in determining the contributions to the budget of CMS. Chair, the UN scale of assessment is a scientific method of ensuring that the economies contribute to UN budgets according to their economic abilities. This is not only an equitable but fair approach, but also a pragmatic one to avoid unnecessary areas. If countries are required to contribute to the budget beyond their economic abilities, as is the case for setting minimum contributions, we would see a sharp increase in the areas, and this will cripple the work of the Secretariat. Chair, I want to illustrate this point of introducing minimum contribution of euros 2,000 that will see the contribution of Zimbabwe, for example, increase by 657%, the United Republic of Tanzania by 228%, Liberia, Guinea, Gambia, etc. by up to 3,178%, and my home country, Uganda, by 310%. As Uganda, therefore, we implore distinguished delegates to maintain existing scale of contributions as opposed to the idea of setting minimum contributions for an instrument like CMS. We note the argument that this approach enables countries with small contributions to pay easily, but is not true as these countries have significant areas beyond 3 years. If the amounts were the issue, then this wouldn't arise, given that some of these countries are in areas of up to 5 years. In addition, the argument that this has been used in CMS dot agreements doesn't arise because they are instruments with very limited membership as opposed to CMS, which is a global instrument. We as Uganda, therefore, appeal to the distinguished delegates to maintain the existing UN scale of contribution and not approve the proposed introduction of minimum contribution. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. We shall now take United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Secretariat for all the work that they have undertaken in preparing the budget documents, including the provision of additional administrative proposals and multiple budget scenarios. These documents place parties in a strong position for substantive discussions during the Conference of the Parties. As the Chair of the Standing Committee and the Executive Secretary have noted already this week, it is quite right that we, as parties, have high ambitions for what CMS can achieve. However, ambitions require funding in order to become reality. First and foremost, it is crucial that the Convention is able to function effectively. Beyond that, it is up to parties to decide how ambitious we wish to be and how such ambition can be delivered in reality. The UK looks forward to further discussions on these points during sessions of the Budget Committee and throughout the Conference of the Parties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, UK. We shall take Brazil.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank the Secretariat for preparing these documents and these scenarios. And we especially appreciate the way that 3 specific activities have been identified in Scenario 4. We think it's crucial that activities from the program of work receive adequate funding. Is extremely worrying the fact that only 14% of the program of work received adequate funding. That is something that we defend in all international forums that what we have today is a deficit of implementation. We have the rules, we have the plan of actions, but we do not have adequate funding. And this news that we had here regarding the funding from the program of work is the proof of that. But we also would like to highlight something that left us very worried, is the fact that in the document itself and in the presentations that we've seen here and in the standing committee, the most substantial change to the document, to the budget, was not presented at any time at all. And that is the change to paragraph 11 of the draft resolution. There, in 9 words, you have a new punishment for countries that are in arrears. It is proposed that countries that are in 3 or more years in arrears would not be able to submit documents for the meetings. That is a completely new requirement. It would affect immediately, I believe, almost 20% of the parties. And in our opinion, it obviously goes against the objective of the treaty, and that is the protection of species. So we are completely against this provision, and also we think it was not presented in a transparent manner. It should have been highlighted, it should have been presented, because parties have to clearly know what they are deciding and what is being proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. We shall take Switzerland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving us the floor. Since Switzerland is taking the floor for the first time, we want to express our gratitude to the government of India for hosting the CMS family for its COP13 in this beautiful country, so diverse in biomes, habitats, species and human cultures. We also want to congratulate Amy Frankel for her nomination as Secretary General of the CMS. And of course, Mr. Chairman, congratulations also to you for your election as Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Please let me express at the beginning of our negotiations a wish for the outcome of this COP. Let us not just go for what seems possible to us now, but let us go for what is needed for making the future possible. And this brings me to the budget for the next triennium. We have all heard during the past 2 days that biodiversity is in a crisis and that we therefore need to act now to stop the loss of wildlands, habitats and species. We need to bend the curve and get back on a path of recovery. And we all know that our work program is already heavily loaded and that load will be even heavier at the end of this COP. So Switzerland would like to call on all the parties to not only be ambitious when it comes to setting targets and elaborate work programs, but also when it comes to discussing and deciding the budget. So we are eager to see what comes back from the discussions in the budget working group. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. We shall take Argentina.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for this information and the valuable documents. Argentina would like to add to Brazil's statement. We agree that the country shouldn't be denied to submit the documents because this will go against the main objective of the convention, which is the preservation of the migratory species and along with it, the whole environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Argentina. We shall take Mongolia.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, colleagues. As highlighted yesterday during the original statement, Mongolia is also supporting and looking forward to have a strong secretariat and ambitious and also balanced program of work, which will be able to implement it fully. And also Mongolia would like to see the State of World's Migratory Species report as well. I think it would be significant, and it would be fully aligning with the IPS report, and then also post-2020 negotiation and discussions we are going to have. And also Mongolia would be actively joining the working group on budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mongolia. We shall take Peru.
Buenos días. Como es la primera vez que la República del Perú se dirige a la Secretaría, quisiera aprovechar la oportunidad para felicitar al país de la India por la excelente organización, acoger a la realización de la COP y a Amy Franklin por su designación. Nos referimos estamos de acuerdo con lo manifestado por Brasil y Argentina respecto a el texto en el párrafo 11, que cambia la situación de los países que no tienen a tiempo una contribución, que no están al día y que no podrían hacer propuestas, aunque se trate de países que están realizando acciones importantes de conservación, que finalmente es la finalidad de esta convención. Gracias.
Thank you. We shall take Costa Rica.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Nosotros también nos apoyamos la propuesta de Brasil, porque es un tema sumamente importante de interés para todos los países parte de esta convención. Muchas gracias.
I recognize Israel. Israel, take the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We would just like to come on board supporting the proposal by the Secretariat for an increase. The projects and the goals that the Executive Secretary presented are certainly rather modest, realistic, and certainly achievable. As she mentioned, there's certainly a possibility of going far beyond with scenario 5, as she called it. But in terms of the request, we believe that these are certainly within the realm of possibility and definitely achievable. What we would also like to come in on the discussion on this issue of paragraph 11 and the arrears. As the Executive Secretary explained so clearly, the budget is in dire straits. Even the countries that are willing to pay, if they pay late, it brings up problems with how the Secretary can function. Even if they pay their bill on time within the year, those that are 3 years more or late, there has to be some sort of compliance. There are very few compliance mechanisms available within the realms of this convention for getting the parties on board. I believe that the proposal of putting some sort of teeth into the convention that, at least in the realm of the payments, that the countries will make up their payments by not being able to contribute documents is reasonable, and we would support that. Thank you.
Australia.
Thanks, Chair. Like the previous speaker from Israel, Australia also supports the inclusion of paragraph 11 in the decision. We've already heard from the Secretariat this morning how difficult the financial situation is to implement our existing program of work, which is a program of work to meet the conservation needs of existing listed migratory species. And I therefore think paragraph 11 is an important addition, because we think we should be focused on those species that are listed, and for those countries that are in more than 3 years arrears and are preventing, or at least in part preventing, the execution of a current program of work. We don't want to see additions to that program coming from those countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Australia. I do not see any further requests for the parties. I will, unless I see a request by a party, I will take, I recognize Norway. Norway, take the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to add to the discussion, as a chair, I will not present the position of Norway, but I will add that we have started a working group for budget and program of work, and there will be a resolution also presented and discussed at this working group. Will be at the end. We'll do away first with whatever scenarios we are looking for, and then we will look carefully, of course, at the resolution, which will also have to discuss what was raised now by Brazil on paragraph 11, amongst other issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Norway. I will take Seychelles and Bangladesh will follow. Seychelles, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since taking the floor for the first time, Seychelles would like to join all the countries who have already expressed their gratitude to India for this excellent organization of the COP. We would also like to congratulate Ms. Amy Franklin for this election, for being the new Acting Executive Secretary General, and I would like to point out that especially in the preparation of this COP, she has already put a lot of weight in and shown her passion, so thank you very much for bringing that forward. Our congratulations to you, Mr. Chair of the COW. And in regards to the budget, I find it extremely important to highlight that, as it's been said, and we all know that, we all listen to it in the high-level segment several times, if we are not turning the tide, when are we going to turn it? So in regards to the budget, it's extremely important that the working group is taking that into consideration. And I'm raising that here, being just a very small country with one delegate. I'm not in a position to take part in all of the working groups, so therefore I find it important to raise it for the small countries. One delegation, delegations with one person only, that this has been considered. And a specific point really needs our attention is the error payments, because we heard very loud and clear these are substantial amounts, and only by thinking about error payments, this is going to make a huge difference. So therefore, I would appeal to all of the parties to consider how to go forward and to bring that to the table in the proposed resolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Seychelles. Bangladesh, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the Secretary for sharing the budget scenario. Basically, budget scenario 4 is very much suitable, especially outreach activities. It is very much important for the conservation of migratory species in country basis, because common people does not know the importance of migratory species. So outreach activities should be increased and budget should be increased in this category. Thank you.
Thank you, Bangladesh. I do not see any further requests from parties. I will move to before I open the floor for non-party delegates, let me invite the Secretary to provide clarification on some of the issues raised by parties. Secretariat.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I just wanted to address the point raised about by Brazil and other delegations about the addition to the resolution, and just explain how that it was developed. In fact, it wasn't something the Secretariat had thought of. It came out of the discussion with the Budget and Finance Subcommittee during the meetings in November. So this is a meeting where, in fact, the level of arrears was even greater, and we had presented a document on the implications of arrears on our budget, and it showed a lot of red ink, which was not a good thing. It showed scenarios of us barely making it through 2020. So that's why the parties who were in that subcommittee were trying to come up with creative ways to motivate parties to pay the contributions and to clean up those arrears. So that's the history of it. I will agree that we should have probably put into the text of this document an explanation of that. So I do acknowledge that, as opposed to just putting it in the resolution. Certainly wasn't our intent not to be transparent, because it is in the resolution, but we could have done better at explaining the reason for it. And then finally, I would say, you know, if this approach is objectionable to the COP, obviously there's other ways to go about this. We're really looking for creative ideas about how to, or non-creative ideas, straightforward ideas, but how to tackle this issue so that I don't spend my time, and that's part of it, to try to chase after this issue, and so we can get on with our work. Thank you.
I see a request for the floor from Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to speak. Since this is the first time for Zimbabwe taking the floor, we join other earlier speakers in congratulating the host for the excellent handling of the conference preparation. AMI, for appointment to the position of Secretary General, as well as yourself, Chair, for accepting the role of the Chair of this COP. The importance of the budget is known, and the work program for operationalizing the decisions and resolutions that are making ourselves as parties. I wish to bring to your attention to the fact that some countries are in arrears because of the limitations on mechanisms for making subscriptions due to circumstances beyond the conservation industry, and indeed the species that we all seek to conserve and protect. So, Mr. Chair, I think we are shooting ourselves in the foot. It doesn't follow that some of these countries do not have the funds. They have the funds, but the payment method is not user-friendly and is not flexible. I submit.
Thank you, Zimbabwe. The concern will be taken note of, and I'm sure the Budget Committee will address itself to innovative approaches of ensuring the payment system is user-friendly. We shall take New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. Since New Zealand is taking the floor for the first time, we would also like to express our sincere thanks to the Government of India for their hosting of this meeting in this beautiful and biodiverse country. We'd also like to express our congratulations to Amy Frankel for her appointment as Executive Secretary. New Zealand would like to echo the views of Israel, Australia and others. The number of parties in arrears is concerning, and it's evident that the Secretariat is facing serious resourcing challenges due to the resulting budget constraints. We too see paragraph 11 of the draft resolution as being important in ensuring the overall effectiveness, the ongoing effectiveness of the Convention. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. We shall now move to observer delegates. Let's take BirdLife International.
Thank you very much, Chair. In this biodiversity super year, BirdLife urges parties to opt for budget scenario 4. Even budget scenario 3 would be a clear indication of parties' lack of commitment to even trying to solve the biodiversity crisis that we all know about all too well. I would like to echo and illustrate the words of Amy, who BirdLife is really delighted to congratulate and welcome as the new Executive Secretary, not least because of her self-confessed admission of being a bird nerd. It cannot be emphasised enough how vital it is to have enough staff in the CMS Secretariat to support the implementation of your decisions at each COP. Through nobody's fault at the Secretariat, the implementation of the avian work programme in the past triennium has been unprecedentedly disappointing since the retirement of Borja, the avian technical officer, and the long-term sick leave of Nick at the Raptors MOU coordinating unit. Progress has been good with the illegal killing agenda, thanks to Laura, the coordinator funded by the EU, and the Energy Task Force, thanks to the German-funded coordinator at BirdLife International and the excellent support of Tillman, the vital avian JPO supported by the German government. But on most other things, including land birds, poisoning, American flyways framework, species action plans, the vulture species, multi-species action plan, progress has been rather negligible. This shows how absolutely vital it is to have that senior secretariat staff capacity, the P4, supported by a P2, and also to have dedicated coordinators for each of the working groups and task forces, whether they're inside or outside the Secretariat. An obvious coordinator that should be in the Secretariat is that for the Land Bird Africa Action Plan. AWA has its own Secretariat, the Raptors have their MOU coordinating unit, yet for all the other birds of the African Eurasian flyway, the land birds, there is only a more or less dormant action plan. Furthermore, the role of the avian P4 is vital for supporting fundraising via voluntary contributions and other staff for coordinators of the various working groups and task forces for meetings of these groups and for implementation of on-the-ground actions. We hope that a responsibility of the new P4 will be to help develop a fundraising strategy for the CMS avian agenda, for which, of course, there's also an urgent requirement for dedicated fundraising capacity in the CMS, fundraising capacity in the CMS Secretariat. I know that these days few of you environment ministries have much spare budget, so now is the time that we should be engaging business in contributing to our work. The energy sector should be funding the Energy Task Force. The agrochemical sector should be funding the Land Bird Action Plan, the poisoning work. This is why the only viable option to ensure that parties are supported to implement your avian commitments at COP13 is to opt for budget option 3 or 4 and enough capacity to raise voluntary contributions for the operation of the working groups and task forces. In the last triennium, due to unavoidable circumstances, implementation of the avian agenda was much less than business as usual. Not only do we have a lot of catching up to do in the next triennium, but even business as usual is completely inadequate if the CMS avian agenda is to contribute effectively to achievement of the SDGs by 2030, let alone the biodiversity targets. If I may also just make the point about a reason why budget scenario 3 is inadequate. BirdLife recommends that it's absolutely essential to include production of the state of the world's migratory species in the core budget. That is the ultimate measure of the success of the Convention. We strongly believe that the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework should include a migratory species indicator as a disaggregation of any species indicator. This would be an indicator for which CMS would have the direct oversight of delivery, as well as being a proxy indicator of ecological connectivity and international cooperation. The state of the world's migratory species would be a perfect vehicle for presenting such an indicator. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, BirdLife International. We shall close the debate on this agenda item, given that there is a dedicated budget working group to further discuss this issue. But I still see requests for the floor from Argentina. I will give the floor to Argentina and then we close the discussion on this agenda item. Argentina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Just a little observation. the content of paragraph 11 does not match with the Spanish language document. That phrase about the denial of right to vote, to submit any meeting documents, that phrase is not included in the Spanish document. Thank you.
Thank you, Argentina. The document in Spanish will be examined by the Secretariat and the interpretation will be addressed. Is that correct, Secretariat? Yes, I see nodding. So, distinguished delegates, you've had quite a good time expressing your initial views on the budget scenarios, the scale of contribution, as well as program of work. I'm very sure that the Budget Committee has taken a good note of these issues, and most of you will participate in the Budget Working Group. As earlier communicated by the Secretariat, in order to cater for delegations with single delegates as raised by Seychelles, the Working Group on Budget is proposed to sit during lunchtime, and no other working group will be sitting concurrently to enable small delegations participate in the budget working group. So we hope that you will have further discussions in the budget working group, and we look forward to receiving a good report from the working group. So we shall move to agenda item 13.3, resource mobilization. I will invite the Secretariat to introduce document 13.3 on resource mobilization. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to present document 13.3 Rev 1, which provides an overview of the financial and in-kind contributions obtained since COP12, as well as their sources. The total of voluntary contributions received and pledged in 2018 and 19 to implement the Convention and some of its instruments amounts to almost 4 million euros. More than half of these resources is allocated to activities whose implementation will also continue in 2020 and beyond. It is a significant amount considering that it equals more than half of the triennial co-budget of the Secretariat. However, as Amy mentioned, it only covers a small portion of the budget required for the implementation of the program of work. These resources were provided by the governments of Australia, Finland, Germany, India, Luxembourg, Monaco, the Netherlands, Norway, Switzerland, and the European Commission. Further details are provided in document 19. New contributions have been recently confirmed, and some were celebrated at the Champion Night. Among these is the generous grant from the Environment Agency of the Abu Dhabi on behalf of the government of the United Arab Emirates for the next 4 years, for which a partnership agreement was signed last night. And this partnership agreement amounts to $5.4 million. Additional funding has been raised by some of the larger CMS Memorandum of Understanding, such as those for raptors, sharks, marine turtles of the Indian Ocean and Southeast Asia, and the dugong. For the latter, for the dugong MOU, for instance, a large grant was received of 4.7 million euros from the International Climate Initiative of the German government, in support of promoting the sustainability, productivity, and resilience of seagrass ecosystems. We would like to thank all these donors for their generous contribution, but we would also like to thank the numerous governments and organizations who provided in-kind contributions through the provision of personal services as well as hosting of meetings. The program of work for the intersessional period between COP13 and COP14, as Amy presented, indicates the level of additional resources needed by the Secretariat to implement its mandate and will provide a basis for resource mobilization efforts for the next 4-year period. I would like to conclude by saying that COP13
is an important opportunity to advance collective efforts to meet our challenges, also by providing adequate resources. We thank once again countries and organizations for their generous contributions and invite many more to follow suit. We invite the COP to take note of the document and make any recommendations and comments as required. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat, for the report on resource mobilization. Our great appreciation to all those making efforts to support the implementation of the Convention. Do we have any quick comments on the report? I see none. I take it that this meeting has duly noted the report in document 13.3. We shall move to agenda item 14, which is strategic plan. I will invite the Secretariat to introduce document 14.1 in relation to progress made in implementation of the strategic plan for migratory species for 2015 to 2013. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be presenting the progress report on the Strategic Plan for Migratory Species. This relates to document 14.1, Annex 2. The Strategic Plan for Migratory Species from 2015 to 2023 aims to ensure a coordinated and coherent approach to migratory species conservation. The plan is structured around 5 overarching goals and 16 targets, and a suite of indicators have been identified to help monitor progress towards the targets. As the midpoint in the strategic plan period, this COP provides an opportunity to review progress and to identify data gaps and priorities for action. For this talk, I will focus on the key findings of the progress report and will highlight the following areas: the data sets used, the areas where notable progress has been made, priority areas for further action, and recommendations resulting from the report. More details by target, as well as on specific data gaps, are provided in the progress report itself. The data sets used primarily focus on the official national reports as submitted by the CMS parties to COP13. The recently revised format closely aligns with the strategic plan and provides an important resource to assess progress towards all 16 of the strategic plan targets. In addition, a number of priority indicators were developed to assess progress, namely subsets of the Red List Index, the Living Planet Index, and a comparison of key biodiversity areas and protected areas were produced. I would like to take this opportunity to thank BirdLife International and the Zoological Society of London for their support in compiling indicator information to feed into this report. So I will start by highlighting several areas where we are on the right track. Notable progress has been made in a number of targets, including Target 1 relating to awareness, where 63% of reporting parties highlighted positive results of awareness-raising activities in their national reports. Target 3 on governance is also promising, with 80% of reporting parties highlighting either positive improvements to governance arrangements or that existing arrangements already satisfy the aims of Target 3. Thirdly, Target 10 is also worthy of note, with 88% of parties reporting some form of inventorying of critical habitats and sites. In addition, we can see from the graph that a long-term increasing trend in proportion of key biodiversity areas that are formally protected as protected areas over the long term that's shown there in the graph. As of 2018, 49% of KBA area, on average, was formally protected for those KBAs identified specifically for migratory species. However, despite these areas of progress, there are also priority areas where international efforts must be ramped up in order to fulfill the ambitious goals of the strategic plan. Particularly relating to Goal 2 on reducing the direct pressures on migratory species and their habitats, and also to Goal 3 on improving the conservation status of migratory species and ecological connectivity. Indeed, these two aspects, reducing the pressures and improving the conservation status, are central not just to achieving the aims of CMS and the strategic plan, but also central to wider efforts to safeguard biodiversity globally. Looking first at the pressures, there are three relevant targets that aim to address the underlying threats to migratory species. Target 5 on the sustainable production and consumption, and for this, a subset of the IUCN Red List information was used to produce a Red List index of extinction risk relating to utilization. As you can see from the graph, the trend is downward, indicating that overexploitation remains a threat to migratory species. For Target 6, relating to fishing and hunting, and 7, relating to multiple anthropogenic threats, the national reports provide important insights into these threats and indicate that the three main threats facing migratory species are habitat loss, habitat degradation, and illegal hunting, including illegal fishing. We did explore options for producing additional indicators for Target 6 beyond the national reports, but limitations in data coverage hindered the ability for indicator development. As a result, more work is needed in relation to both addressing the underlying threats and also in developing more robust ways to measure progress towards Target 6 and 7. The second area where further action is needed as a priority relates to conservation status. Favorable conservation status represents the ultimate objective of many of the targets of the strategic plan, and indeed CMS, and Target 8 is therefore essential for assessing the overall levels of implementation. While the national reports provide useful insights from parties on notable changes in conservation status for some groups, it is limited and does not provide a comprehensive overview. The Red List Index, shown here for migratory species, provides us a rough idea of how things are going, and it does show a continuing downward trend in the status of migratory species, with more and more species at risk of extinction. But we can only see this for mammals and birds, and so there's still gaps in our understanding for the wider context of CMS-listed species and wider migratory species. Ultimately, a systematic review of the IUCN Red List information for various taxonomic and geographic subsets could provide further insights, and the proposed conservation status report or a similar flagship report, which Amy was mentioning, would allow a more comprehensive assessment of the state of migratory species. As we move forward into the latter half of the strategic plan and towards 2023, several recommendations emerge from this midterm review. In particular, a focus on implementation continues to be key. More action individually and cooperatively to fulfill the overall ambitions of the strategic plan are needed. A focus on the drivers of migratory species decline and actions to improve conservation status will be essential. Secondly, indicator development and data improvements will also be needed to ensure that we're able to fully assess and measure the entire strategic plan. This would include further developing indicators not yet operable, so for instance, those related to Target 6 and 7 that I highlighted. Support to ongoing efforts to fill underlying data gaps for data sets of global importance, such as the Red List and the Living Planet Index. The conducting of case studies and single assessment studies identified in the strategic plan. And all three of these align with the draft decision provided in Annex 1. In addition, mobilizing resources and capacity building will be essential to ensure these success. To summarize, progress is being made. However, at the midpoint of the strategic plan, we are not yet seeing the conservation outcomes that we desire, and more work to protect, connect, and conserve migratory species is needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretariat. I will invite the meeting to make any comments on the report, as well as the proposed draft decisions in Annex 1. I see European Union. Take the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The EU and its member states would like to thank the Secretariat for the preparation of this document. We take note of the assessment of the progress towards the achievement of the SPM targets contained in Annex 2. We acknowledge that a positive progress has been made towards the achievement of some SPMs, primarily towards targets related to public awareness, governance, and spatial protection of critical habitats and sites for migratory species. However, the EU and its member states note with deep concern the lack of progress towards targets related to mitigation of impacts of stress and pressures on migratory species, especially the lack of significant progress in mitigating the unsustainable use. We recognize that further efforts need to be taken in order to identify and fill in data gaps in order to elaborate the final assessment of the progress and determine the priorities for the 2023 follow-up. We support the adoption of the draft decision containing Annex 1 of this document, but would like to propose a small amendment in order to make connection to Agenda Item 14.2 and ensure that full analysis is ready in time for Standings Committee consideration. We will submit our proposal in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, EU. Please make sure that you submit proposed text change so that this committee can look at the revised text. All other delegates that have made statements and comments are encouraged to submit them to the email given to the Secretariat so that they can be captured in the meeting report. I will take South Africa.
Thank you very much, Chair. We appreciate the report that has been provided by the Secretariat as well as the options that have been laid in front of us to follow up on the strategic plan 2015-2023. We, however, request that there should be a directive in the draft decision to the Conference of the Parties to consider reallocating the terms of reference of the existing strategic plan working group that developed the initial strategic plan and to take over the follow-up to the Strategic Plan 2015-2023 to enhance the use of the existing expertise. In considering the whole lot of international developments that needs or require to be incorporated into the revised strategic plan, there will be a need for expertise, such expertise from the working group to be in force, and hence we will propose an addition to the draft decisions of directive to the COP to consider establishing or extending the terms of reference of the existing working group. Thank you.
Thank you, South Africa. Let me invite the Secretariat to respond to comments made by South Africa and perhaps confirm if proposed change from EU has arrived so that we can put the decision on the screen if the change is not fundamental. Okay. Secretariat?
Okay, I hadn't planned to take the floor, but I was just going to point out the next agenda item, which actually is on the future options for follow-up to the strategic plan, just to bring that to the attention of South Africa, because it might be that's an area that relevant to the proposal you just made, but we'll get to that in 1 minute. Thank you.
Okay. We shall wait to get proposed changes submitted to the Secretariat, and then the document Okay. Changes in the documents will be uploaded on the web, so keep checking in the in-session documents. If there are any improvements in the drafting, you will see them in the folder of in-session documents. So keep monitoring the in-session documents. We shall proceed to agenda item 14.2. Which is options for follow-up to the strategic plan on migratory species. I will now invite the Secretariat to introduce document 14.2.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So this is pretty straightforward. As the parties know, there was a strategic plan adopted for migratory species that runs through 2023, and in the Convention on Biological Diversity's COP14, they adopted the process to develop a new post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Now, of course, the CMS strategic plan was mapped against the previous strategic plan for biodiversity that runs through the end of this year. And so by the end of this year, we're all hoping that, of course, there'll be a new strategy adopted by the CBD COP at its 15th meeting in October. So because the CMS strategic plan covers the period up to 2023, any possible follow-up for the period after that should be planned and developed during the intersessional period between COP13 and 14, with a view to having a proposal for consideration and adoption by COP14. However, because there is no strategic plan yet from that other process of CBD, we don't know exactly what we'll be seeing, and so therefore we'll have to do some work to map the mandates of CMS and its existing strategic plan against what comes out. So therefore, we've proposed a draft decision for your consideration with some tasks aimed at the Secretariat to undertake an analysis of what comes out of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework so that we can provide information for the consideration of the Standing Committee in the intersessional period. For the Standing Committee, we also then make likewise some recommendations to them to consider what is put before them and then consider the options and next steps. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretariat. I will invite any quick comments on document 14.2. European Union.
Thank you, Chair. The EU and its member states would like to thank the Secretariat for its active participation in the preparation for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and for the efforts aiming and ensuring that migratory species concerns are adequately reflected in it. We support the adoption of the draft decision contained in the annex of the document, giving the mandate to the Secretariat to undertake the in-depth analysis of the post-2020 global biodiversity frameworks once adopted and identify a suitable role of the CMS family in this implementation, as well as the most appropriate option for the follow-up of SPMs. Regarding possible options for the follow-up of SPMs, we would like to also see the inclusion of approaches by another MEAs, such as CITES, in setting strategic objectives, and are proposing changes to the draft decision that reflects this position. The EU and its member states will submit the proposed changes in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, EU. South Africa.
Thank you, Chair. Just to emphasize the comment made earlier on, as the Executive Secretary indicated clearly that it is relevant to this. And just to add to the proposal that was made earlier, depending on the availability of resources, I'll submit the written addition to the decision in writing.
Thank you, South Africa. I see request for the floor by CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity. CBD, wait a minute. I see now request from United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. The UK would like to echo the thanks expressed by others to the Secretariat for preparing this proposal. It is crucial that migratory species are appropriately reflected in the post-2020 Global Diversity Framework, and only right that we consider carefully the most appropriate way to take into account the framework once adopted. We therefore echo the support for the draft decision put forward by the Secretariat and welcome a cross-cutting approach to develop a follow-up to the strategic plan for migratory species post-2023. We must get the most out of our limited resources, and so we welcome the intention to identify where the CMS family can most effectively contribute to delivering the post-2020 biodiversity framework, and to learn lessons from the ways of working of other biodiversity MEAs. Thank you.
Thank you, United Kingdom. We shall now take CBD.
Thank you, Chair. This intervention is on both agenda items 14.1 and 14.2. The Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity welcomes the suggested recommendations contained in documents 14.1 and 14.2 regarding developing indicators on targets 6 and 7, that is 13.A subparagraph A of document 14.1. It is suggested that while developing indicators, the ongoing processes in other international fora may be taken note of. Regarding recommendations to the CMS Secretariat on analysis of post-2020 GBF, that is 13.A subparagraph A of document 14.2, it is suggested that taking in note that 28 CBD and CMS parties have the same NFP for both conventions, and in 72 countries the NFPs are from the same ministry, proactively develop issues of mutual interest and suggest in the negotiations. Sorry, I lost my, just a minute, sir. Negotiations process itself rather than waiting till the conclusion of post-2020 GBF. It is also suggested that CMS may consider to send the outcomes of their COP to the OWG on post-20 GBF meetings in Rome and Cali. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, CBD. I do not see any further requests for the floor. I take it that the document is generally agreeable, and if there are any comments, please submit them in writing so that they can be looked at by the Secretariat for any possible improvement. We shall move to agenda item 15, Scientific Council. Starting with document 15.1, I invite Australia as a representative from the Scientific Council to introduce document 15.1. Australia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. So this document is about the review of the COP-appointed councillor subject areas that the sessional committee of the Scientific Council undertook during the last intersessional period. And the ability to appoint COP-appointed councillors is a unique and valuable element of the Convention. The identification of relevant expert areas and the subsequent appointment of individual experts is critical to the effective functioning of not just the Scientific Council, but the Convention as well. COP-appointed councillor subject areas were first identified at COP1 in 1985. And while there has been some additions and movements and some informal recasting of the various subject areas since that time, they have remained fairly stable since COP6 in 1999, with only 3 additions made since that time. The most recent COP-appointed councillor subject area for climate change was identified at COP10 in 2011. So at its 3rd meeting, the sessional committee agreed to conduct a formal review of COP-appointed councillor subject areas and established a working group to undertake the review intersessionally. I chaired the working group, and the working group also contained party-appointed sessional committee members from each CMS region. The working group did a number of things during its review. Firstly, to understand areas where expert advice has been valuable to the effective functioning of the Convention, the working group examined issues discussed at the last 3 COPs, so from COP10 to COP12, to identify high interest areas and potential pressure points. The working group also considered the future needs of the Convention with regard to independent expert advice. A variety of sources were examined to identify potential future areas of interest, including national reports submitted by parties for COP12, the CMS strategic plan, and relevant documentation from other biodiversity-related conventions, such as the Aichi targets, Sustainable Development Goals, horizon scanning literature, and a lot of other stuff as well. Secondly, the working group determined an ongoing review process where in future COP-appointed councillor subject areas will be the focus of a regular review to ensure their ongoing applicability. And you can find a diagram of the proposed review process at Figure 1 in Annex 2 of Doc 15.1. Thirdly, based on the analysis of items considered at COP10 through to COP12, and having regard to the issues that may need to be included in future CMS considerations, the working group proposed that COP-appointed councillor subject areas should be a combination of both species groupings and thematic issues to cover the majority of present and emerging issues. So these subject areas were determined as being birds, terrestrial mammals, aquatic mammals, marine fish, climate change, connectivity networks, marine pollution, bycatch, and invasive species. It is recognised that the proposed groupings do not cover every species group or threat that may be considered by the Convention, and it has never been the intention that COP-appointed councillor subject areas should be identified to cover every possible combination of species and issues that are of concern to the Convention. It's also important to note that if a cross-cutting issue or particular species group, such as invertebrates, perhaps becomes a major focus for many parties in the future, the review process that will occur regularly will be able to respond to these emerging interests. Based on the recommendations, subject areas where current COP-appointed councillors would remain, if available, are birds, climate change, aquatic mammals and bycatch. Nominations for appropriate experts have been sought for the newly proposed areas of terrestrial mammals, connectivity networks, marine pollution, marine fish and invasive species. I'd also like to say that the working group recognised the invaluable contribution to the Scientific Council work program that the current COP-appointed councillors have made. COP-appointed councillors are experts in their fields and have selflessly contributed their time and efforts to the betterment of the Convention. For this reason, it was also agreed at sessional committee that the Secretariat should establish an ex officio register to capture all of the expert areas that have been provided to the Convention from COP-appointed councillors through time. I would also like to just give a quick run through of the nomination process that the Secretariat kindly ran for the new nomination, to seek new nominations for the newly created or newly recommended COP-appointed councillor subject areas. So a notification was put out from the Secretariat seeking nominations from parties of suitable experts, and we have been lucky enough to receive one nomination for each expert subject area, with the Secretariat noting that this morning they had received the final one for the invasive species role. So in summary, we have a nomination for the marine fish position of Dr. Rima Jabadoo, who is currently a Sharks MOU Advisory Committee member. Luckily, we have an excellent nomination of our own Dr. Ferna Spina for the role of connectivity and networks from the Government of Italy. So, I mean, Ferna has been a champion for the cause and issue of connectivity throughout his tenure as our Scientific Council Chair, so I can think of no one better to carry that forward in the future. We also have the nomination of Dr. Urs Brittenmoser for the role of COP-appointed councillor for terrestrial mammals, which the Government of Switzerland nominated. The COP-appointed councillor for marine pollution has received a nomination of Dr. Mark Simmons, who was submitted by the Government of Monaco, and the invasive species position has received the nomination of Dr. Holly Jones, who has been supported and submitted through the Government of New Zealand. So I'd like to firstly thank everyone that's been involved in the review, and especially those parties that have submitted nominations for the new positions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Australia. I will invite any comments on document 15.1. The European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The EU and its member states would like to take note of the sessional committee agreed recommendation given in the Annex 2 of this document. We would also like to thank the working group of the review of the COP Appointed Council subject area on its efforts in the institutional period to conduct this review. In principle, we agree with the COP Appointed Councillor subject area for the period of COP13 till COP15 that include bird, terrestrial mammals, aquatic mammals, marine fish, invasive alien species, marine pollution, climate change, bycatch, and connectivity or networks. However, we consider some additional subject area to be a priority, such as invertebrates or insects, animal culture and social complexity, and also see the need to have subject area for fish rather than for marine fish. In that regard, we would like to see this discussed further during the meeting of the Conference of the Parties. We also support draft decision on the establishment of ex officio register of expertise, as it is important to capture and keep in one place all COP-appointed councillor expertise. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, EU. Any further comments from parties? Perú.
Muchas gracias. El Perú, en nombre de los países de la región de Sudamérica, Centroamérica y el Caribe aquí presentes, manifiesta estar de acuerdo con las nominaciones presentadas para los consejeros científicos designados, especialmente la referida al Dr. Rodrigo Medellín. Asimismo, queremos proponer que en el área temática de peces marinos se agreguen los peces de agua dulce o continentales, debido a que en la actualidad se encuentran excluidos de este grupo. Gracias.
Thank you, Peru. Okay, let's take WCS.
Thank you very much, Chair. WCS appreciates the work of the Scientific Council on preparing a list of COP-appointed counselor subject areas. We greatly appreciate the contribution of all the COP-appointed counselors in the work of CMS, but we want to draw your attention to a key gap in the subject areas presented in document 15.1. And we do note that Resolution 12.4 is clear that there should be both taxonomic and thematic appointed counselors, such as bycatch, marine pollution, and climate change that we already have. We note that the recent IPBES global assessment recognizes overexploitation of species as one of the 5 direct drivers of biodiversity loss. It is critical, we believe, and we urge parties to consider adding illegal and unsustainable take-in trade as its own COP-appointed subject area, and not limit such considerations to bycatch, which is extremely important, but excludes all terrestrial and most avian species in terms of overexploitation. Illegal and unsustainable take-in trade is not an emerging issue. Unfortunately, it has well emerged, and it's one of the main drivers. And including that would more effectively reflect the biodiversity loss, but also more closely align with what's being developed in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We realize it's probably not feasible at this COP to add such a COP-appointed counselor. We would encourage discussion of this issue and strongly urge you to consider in the future this major gap and include a COP-appointed counselor on illegal and unsustainable take and trade. Thank you very much.
Thank you, WCS. Okay. We have requests for further discussion on this agenda item. I want to suggest that EU, Peru, Australia constitute themselves into friends of the chair on this matter. They have further discussion and advise the chair subsequently on how to move forward on this issue. Is that acceptable? EU, Australia, and Peru? Okay, let me take New Zealand and the United Kingdom first before I get confirmation on whether the proposed approach will deliver us. New Zealand?
Thank you, Chair. Can I also request, please, that New Zealand be part of that small group? Thank you.
Okay, New Zealand is noted. UK?
Thank you, Chair. Very much the same from the UK. We would like to be part of that small group.
Okay, 5 friends of the chair I think are enough. We can afford to take additional 2, that's New Zealand and UK, together with EU, Peru, and Australia. Is that acceptable as the best way forward on this issue? Is there any objection to this proposed approach? If you have any objection, ask for the floor. If there is no objection, do not ask for the floor. I see. Oh, Argentina.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Argentina también se quisiera postular para esto.
Argentina, you have been added on the Friends of the Chair. It appears there is no objection to this approach. So, Australia, I want to invite you to chair this discussion of the Friends of the Chair and advise the Chair on how to move forward on this issue. You can have a discussion perhaps in the course of today, and we can see you get back to us tomorrow. Okay, let's move to agenda item 15.2, document 15.2. I invite distinguished delegates to look at document 15.2. I will invite the Secretariat to introduce document 15.2 on appointment of members of the Sessional Committee of the Scientific Council. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So I'm presenting this document on behalf of Marco, who unfortunately can't be here this morning. So it's revision 1 of the document that we are looking at to make sure everybody has the right version. So this document provides summary information regarding the appointment of members of the Sessional Committee of the Scientific Council. And the basis for the points outlined in the document is Resolution 12.4. So the Sessional Committee of the Scientific Council consists of the two categories of appointed councillors we have, the ones appointed by the COP, which we just discussed, and then 15 party-appointed councillors. So it is a subset of the full membership of the Scientific Council. The Resolution 12.4 outlines that there should be regional representation in the Sessional Committee, so 3 councillors should be appointed from each of the regions: Africa, Asia, Europe, Oceania, and South and Central America and the Caribbean. Each meeting of the Conference of Parties appoints the Sessional Committee for the subsequent triennium, and the appointment can be renewed once, but it's not automatic. So each COP decides completely on the composition of the sessional committee of the Scientific Council. Normally it would be expected that members of the sessional committee serve for the 2 triennia that they are being appointed for, but there's another provision in the resolution that says that half of the party-appointed membership should be renewed at each COP, so there's a quota to meet. Since there's an uneven number of party-appointed councillors, 15, so that would be 7 or 8 members that have to be renewed at each conference of the parties. So there's also a provision to appoint alternate members of the sessional committee, so up to 3 from each region, who would be stepping in if the members, any of the members is unable to attend the meetings. In the document you find a table, part of paragraph 9, that shows the situation currently in terms of completed terms, and it shows that there are 6 of the current members of the sessional committee that have completed 2 terms at this COP, and those are the members of Kenya, South Africa, France, Italy, the Philippines, and New Zealand. There's also 1 position that is currently vacant from the region of Asia. So, as was already outlined in the Standing Committee, and you have no doubt already discussed also in your regional consultations, the regions should sit together and identify the candidates they would like to propose for the sessional committee, for the party-appointed members of the sessional committee. So each region should either confirm, if still possible, the existing members, or nominate new ones where terms have been completed or where there's a vacant position. I'd like to remind that the regions should submit their recommendations of the candidates by tomorrow evening, so Wednesday evening, so that the Bureau can review the nominations. So the deadline is tomorrow at the close of the session, really. And I would also like to remind that, as for other offices in convention bodies, that representatives from countries with contributions in arrears of 3 years or more cannot be appointed. And one further consideration, that if members are appointed from countries that are not eligible for travel support, the assumption would be that they would be able to fund their own participation in the meetings of the sessional committee, either through their institution or their government. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. Any observations from the meeting? I am aware the regional coordination meetings are consulting on these issues, but if there are any general comment that you would like to raise on this agenda item, this is the time. I see no request for the floor. I take it that, I see Senegal. Senegal, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Le Sénégal prend la parole pour la première fois. Donc nous félicitons le gouvernement de la République de l'Inde pour l'excellente organisation de cette COP. Nous félicitons aussi Amy pour sa nomination et le président aussi, et également le secrétariat. J'aimerais un peu revenir sur la nomination des conseillers de session scientifique. Tout à l'heure, quand le secrétariat a fait la présentation, le secrétariat a parlé des pays qui ont des arriérés sur 3 ans et qui ne sont pas éligibles pour les postes, par exemple, de conseillers ou autres postes comme le comité permanent. On nous a approché hier pour nous dire que le Sénégal a des arriérés de 3 ans et que éventuellement on ne serait pas éligible pour pour voir les 3 prochaines années, puisqu'on est déjà choisi comme conseiller scientifique. On a déjà fait les 3 ans, il nous reste 3 autres années. Nous avons reçu la facture de la CMS qui stipulait que le Sénégal, il était préférable que le Sénégal paye sa facture fin mars 2020. Et donc nous sommes au mois de février. On nous a approché hier pour nous dire que si vous ne payez pas tout de suite ou vous donnez des engagements pour dire que vous allez payer, vous ne serez pas peut-être éligible pour le poste de conseiller scientifique ou pour un autre poste. Je n'ai pas bien compris tout à l'heure quand elle a dit que si le pays peut se prendre en charge, il peut normalement participer aux sessions. Est-ce que dans ce cas-là, par exemple, pour le Sénégal, si le Sénégal est à jour ou si le Sénégal n'est pas à jour et peut se prendre en charge, est-ce que ça a une conséquence sur sa nomination ou pas? Je pense que le paragraphe 5 dit que les paiements doivent être effectifs le 1er mars 2020. Cette COP a été avancée. Normalement, la COP devrait se tenir au mois d'octobre. Peut-être qu'on ne serait pas dans cette situation de payer, puisque les pays devraient payer dans l'intercession avant la COP. La COP a été avancée au mois de février. Ça a posé un problème de paiement pour certains pays, comme le Sénégal. Notre ministre a pris les dispositions depuis le mois de janvier 2020 pour demander tous les arriérés de toutes les conventions pour prendre la procédure de les solder. Et nous avons la lettre pour ça qui a été émise par le ministre de l'Environnement du Sénégal pour demander les arriérés de toutes les conventions qui sont sous la responsabilité de son ministère. Et je pense que le processus est enclenché pour payer un peu les arriérés que le Sénégal doit à la CMS. Ma question est, quelle est aujourd'hui la position du Sénégal? Dans ma position, par exemple, en tant que conseiller scientifique, est-ce que je dois pouvoir continuer pour les prochaines sessions ou qu'est-ce qui va se passer?
Thank you, Senegal. Let me take Costa Rica and then we shall respond to the question raised by Senegal. Costa Rica, you have the floor.
Buenos días, señor presidente. Por parte de la región de América Central, Sur y el Caribe, para efectos del Comité Científico, hemos acordado mantener los mismos miembros que se encuentran nominados para este próximo trienio. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Costa Rica, for confirming that you are keeping existing members for the next term as a region. I implore other regions to fast-track finalization of their nominations. Coming back to the issue raised by Senegal, I want to suggest that the issue be taken up by the Bureau to have a detailed discussion of it, and we get back to you tomorrow. Is that acceptable, Senegal? Nodding, the issue will be tabled to the Bureau, and we shall get better clarity on how that plays out. Whether March or Feb mean the same, let's discuss it further and be able to advise better. I recognize requests for the floor by South Africa.
Thank you very much, Chair. Africa region has consulted on this matter, and we have one sessional committee member still having one term to finish, which is Senegal, but that is going to be finalized during the Bureau. So in which case then, if the Bureau agrees, they will have Senegal alternated by Ghana. And the second substantive member would be Uganda, alternated by Ethiopia. And the third one would be Zimbabwe, alternated by Seychelles. We'll take the floor again tomorrow and clarify Senegal's issue after the Bureau has met. Thank you.
Thank you, South Africa. Speaking on behalf of Africa region, we take note of your submissions, and we shall confirm on the issue of Senegal after the Bureau meeting. So you should be able to conclude your consultations in your early morning tomorrow meeting, because the Bureau will have already discussed this matter. Thank you very much. We now move to agenda item 16, election of parties to the Standing Committee. I will invite the Secretariat to introduce document 16.2 on election of parties to the Standing Committee. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Document 16 on the election of parties to the Standing Committee provides guidance to parties regarding the election of regional and alternate members to the Standing Committee in accordance with Resolution 9.15. A table provided in paragraph 3 indicates current members of the Standing Committee and whether they are eligible for a further term. This triennium, a large proportion of regional members have reached their maximum term, and so must be replaced by other parties within their regions. The Standing Committee has already tasked the regional groups to consider these positions. Parties will also elect further members to serve as alternate regional representatives. The table in paragraph 5 lists the current alternate members. There is no term limit for alternates. Parties are requested to consult within their regional groups to determine which parties will be nominated as regional and alternate members of the Standing Committee. The Standing Committee has requested that the regional groups report to the Bureau by tomorrow, that is Wednesday evening, with these nominations. In the closing plenary on the 22nd, parties will formally elect regional and alternate members of the Standing Committee in accordance with Resolution 915. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Do we have any comments or updates from regional consultations? I see the request for the floor by South Africa. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The Africa region has consulted on this matter and has identified the members to represent the region. Substantive member number 1 is Mali, and the alternate is Zimbabwe. Another substantive member is Algeria, and the alternate member is Gabon. Kenya, and the alternate member is Uganda. We will, however, raise some issues with the Bureau around Gabon, and we will confirm this tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, South Africa, for confirming your regional representatives and alternates to the Standing Committee. Let's hear from Costa Rica.
Gracias, señor presidente. Para la región de América Central, Sur y el Caribe tenemos las siguientes nominaciones. América Central y el Caribe, para Comité Permanente, propietario Panamá, suplente Trinidad y Tobago. Para América del Sur, propietario Uruguay, suplente el Perú. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Costa Rica. Do you have any further update from other regions? There is none. Consultations are still going on. So I implore all regions to conclude their consultations on this matter by tomorrow, so that the Bureau can have time to look at the proposed nominations. And then, of course, the Conference of Parties will confirm these nominations on the last day of the conference. We shall move to agenda item 17, CMS contribution to the post-2020 biodiversity framework. I invite the Secretariat to introduce document 17.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, the topic of CMS contribution to the post-2020 global biodiversity framework is very large at this COP and in the various meetings that we've had in November of the Sessional Committee and the Standing Committee, as well as in the Stakeholder Forum and the high-level segment that were held here prior to the opening of the COP. We have 3 documents that we have prepared for consideration and to support the work of the COP. There's document 17. There is there's document 17, there's an add 1 document, and there's an add 2, which is the most recent document I wanted to draw your attention to, which does 2 things. It first updates the CMS engagement and contributions since October 2019, and there's been quite a bit of activity since then. That includes a meeting of the CMS Family Working Group that took place in November and actually developed developed the concept of ecological connectivity, developed a definition for that, and it also identified some key priorities related to ecological connectivity that could be brought forward into the post-2020 process. The CMS Secretariat was also participating in the discussions that were held at the CBD Substa meeting that took place in it was either November, early December, I think November 2019. I was there. And we have submitted also formally into the process a paper for the consideration of the open-ended working group after the inputs from the discussions in November among parties here. So what we've attached, we have 2 things in add 2. One is Annex 1 is in fact the submission that CMS Secretariat put forward, and then we also have the 0 draft that came out in January from the CBD process to make that available to the room. We also did a brief analysis of that. So we had the help of a consultant to look through that quickly and compare the 0 draft against the priorities that had been stated by the CMS working group and provide that to you as ideas for bringing forward into the open-ended working group discussions which are happening actually immediately following this COP. And finally, the document provides some indicators that have been developed for global and national biodiversity targets that relate to CMS interests as a further submission to the CBD process. So in short, we are following very closely the process as it moves forward. I can also report that the CMS, through the Biodiversity Liaison Group, has also established a very positive relationship with the 2 co-chairs of the open-ended working group. We had a Biodiversity Liaison Group meeting in the fall, and at that meeting, all of the heads of the different MEAs, biodiversity-related MEAs, asked to have a conversation with the co-chairs of the open-ended working group. And that was quickly scheduled, and I really am grateful to the Secretariat of CBD for making that happen. We had a conference call, and then we had actually another call just in this past January. So they're really engaging with not just CMS, but also with the other biodiversity related conventions. it's very important, for us also to talk to each other, and I want to also bring to your attention that the government of Switzerland is also going to be hosting, and that's in March actually, so it's coming up very soon, another one of sort of meetings of the different biodiversity-related conventions, which will include the Secretariat as well as parties with regional representation. And for us, in fact, what they wanted was to have representatives of the standing committee, of the governing bodies. And since the standing committee, as we just discussed, is going to be freshly elected here or adopted here, we have directed them to work through the current standing committee chair, Mr. Øystein Storkensen, to help guide them in terms of what would be sort of regional balance of representatives to go to those meetings. In terms of what we have provided to this meeting for your consideration, first let me describe, we have a decision which essentially is directed first to parties, calling on the CMS parties, the focal points, to liaise with CBD focal points as an effective way to ensure that CMS priorities get integrated into the positions brought to CBD and that discussion. And there's a few other points on that front. And then directed to the Secretariat to continue our work to engage in the process, to report to the Standing Committee. And I want to actually draw to your attention, we had also included text which related to supporting the development of a strategic plan for migratory species beyond 2023 to be aligned to the post-2020 framework. But we've just discussed how the agenda item on that topic was a little more open-ended than this. This document was actually drafted before the document on the future of any kind of strategic plan or other option. So because this had to be presented to the Standing Committee and the Scientific Council in the fall. So that's why this is in here. I just want to draw that to your attention because the parties might want to, of course, align the decision as they decide on how to go forward. I'll also note that we did not include a resolution in this proposal, and that was very intentional because our host government, the government of India, had indicated that it desired to introduce a declaration, the Gandhinagar Declaration, which would then be provided. It has been on our website for some time now. We drew that to the attention of parties through a notification, and it was the intent of the government to use the high-level segment to listen to that discussion, to take inputs from that discussion, as well as comments that various parties and observers have been sending to the government of India. And so I'll obviously up to India in terms of how to handle all the inputs that they've already received. If they've been sent to the Secretariat, we're forwarding them to the government of India. And it's my understanding that they would then provide a proposal to this room which would take a declaration and move it forward in the form of a resolution as has been done in the previous COP. So let me stop there. I know I just gave a lot of information, and let me hand the floor back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Before I invite Government of India to introduce the proposed resolution, let me request the Secretariat to play a video from the co-chairs of the open-ended working group on the post-2020.
Today, my name is Basil Van Hav, and together with Francis Agwal from Uganda, we're co-chairing the post-2020 process for the Convention on Biological Diversity. We're welcoming and looking forward to engage you at the Convention on Migratory Species at your COP to provide with some input to us and discuss how our two conventions can work better together. Here is a very abbreviated timeline of our process. As you can see on the slide, we've completed the regional consultation and we're about 2/3 of the way into the thematic issues. We're now embarking a very few days after your COP into the negotiation process with open-ended working group 2 that is now going to be hosted in Rome, Italy at the FAO. And that negotiation will continue all the way to the third meeting that will take place at the end of July in Cali in Colombia. And then the package would eventually go to COP15. So it is very timely that you set your attention on how we can interact between the two conventions. Here is a very quick overview of the theory of change or logic model that we're using. It should be read from right to left. So at the very right, a vision, living in harmony with nature. And it's a vision for all of us. In fact, what we're thinking is that the framework and the global biodiversity frameworks that we're drafting is a framework for all. It is a framework for you at CMS, it's a framework for us in the CBD, it is a framework for countries, for parties, for industry, for civil society. Now, one message that we received very clearly in our consultation is people wanted to understand how the action they would be taking now will enable reaching that vision. And to that effect, we're drafting some goals. Those are items or elements that we can measure and we can see progress on the status of ecosystem, on species, which is of particular relevance to your convention, genetic diversity, sustainable use, which is also relevant to your convention, and equity in benefit sharing. In order to make those change and reach those new heights in health of ecosystem, we need to take action. And those are linked to reducing the threats, meeting people needs, and all the supporting action that we will take. In this slide, you see the zero draft. That's the draft that Francis and I have prepared for negotiation at our meeting in Rome. And then that's a starting point for the negotiation. Here you see 5 goals, one related to ecosystem, the second one related to species, and you will see if you look in the detailed text that we are talking about on both the endangered species and the common species, genetic diversity, how nature provides with people, and access and benefit sharing. On the center, you will see there in blue how we're going to be addressing the threats. And of particular importance to you is land and sea use change, pollution, and how we make sustainable use stay that way. The new block with the orange piece, which is around how nature, how people, is something that we're adding at the request of parties that wanted to see the second objective of the convention, how nature meet people needs added. So we'll see how the discussion goes. And you'll also be interested in looking in the detail of the solution side, particularly targets 17 and 20 that relate how we're going to be changing our pattern of consumption and setting new behaviors and new views for success. Now, some reflection from Francis and I about how the CMS can contribute to that framework, how the CBD contribute to your work, and how we should be coordinating across convention. A lot of comments we received since publication of the Zero Drafts is the international or the multinational dimension of our work and how we should be integrating CMS role for working across borders better into our frameworks. So we're particularly interested in the language you would see and you would welcome into the framework, and how the CMS can contribute to the implementation of the goal of our framework and overall progress on nature. Now, what can the CBD do for you? What are the language you'll be looking? I'll be particularly interested in your views, particularly as is related to the coordination across the convention. In many cases, we heard about the coordination between climate convention and the nature convention. But I think we need to look deeper at how we coordinate across the CMS into the National Biodiversity Action Plan, the NBSAPs. Some example, people have talked about the review process. And in some cases, we do review at the global level, but it may be relevant to look at review at a sub-global level, at the regional, ecozone, or flyway level. How our countries that are working together on common species could be working together in sharing best practice. Could CMS have a role into that? All those are questions that I'm leaving with you, and I'm looking forward to hear your response. Once again, we're very sorry not to be able to be with you, and we encourage you in your discussion. Thank you. You see here the logo for our COP, and the slogan, which is ecological civilization, building a shared future for all life on Earth. Once again, we'd like to thank you for your attention and look forward to your outcome. Thank you.
Let me now invite India to introduce the Gandhinagar Declaration.
Good morning, Chair, and good morning to all the delegates who have assembled here. India have moved the Gandhinagar Declaration, a draft copy, on priorities for conservation of migratory species. It was done well before the holding of the COPs in its scheduled date, and we have received certain comments on the Gandhinagar Declaration. Thereafter, the issue was taken up in the high-level segment, wherein we had representations from different countries, honorable ministers who were there, followed by organizational heads from important and eminent organizations involved in biodiversity and wildlife conservation internationally. We have noted down some key messages from the high-level segment, which was held on 16 February 2020. The discussions which ultimately ended suggest that the draft that was circulated by the Government of India was extremely valuable. It reinforces the thoughts and ideas which are ingrained in the Gandhinagar Declaration. It also includes priorities of CMS, underlining the connectivity and international cooperation. It also finds interlinkages with the climate change and sustainable development. It tries to explore areas of connectivity with special areas, wider landscapes, and species population. It also reinforces the concept of connectivity through people and connecting aspirations. It culminates with the idea of real impact through the process of implementation. So the Government of India has noted down these key messages, and they will be submitting during the course of the meeting, and it may well be taken up for further discussion before finalizing the Gandhinagar Declaration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, India. I think it would be good to establish a contact group on this issue. But before we do, let me open the floor for general discussion before we set up a contact group to finalize the declaration. The floor is open. Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank the Government of India for preparing the Gandhinagar Declaration. I think it transmits a lot of the main points that we have been discussing here about the importance of connectivity, the importance of countries reaching their commitments in the various multilateral environmental agreements. And I think just before we open a contact group regarding the declaration, I think we could first see what text, what we have arrived at with the comments that were sent, and also with what was added in the high-level segment. And if there is disagreement about it, we can have a further discussion. But I think I would like first to see the document and to see if there's this necessity to have a contact group. Thank you.
European Union.
Thank you, Chair. The EU and its member states would like to thank the Secretariat for actively engaging in the preparations for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and highlighting conservation needs of migratory species. We agree that the decision 12105E has been implemented that can be deleted. We also agree with the Scientific Council that the draft decision 13AAB overlaps with 13BB and can be deleted. We stress the need for the CMS to continue its active involvement in relevant discussions for the development of post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in order to secure synergies and coherence. We are proposing changes in the draft decision in order to align it with the agenda 14.2. Of course, we will submit this proposal in writing. Regarding the Gandhi-Naglar Declaration, the EU and its member states additionally submitted our proposals to the Secretariat and Government of India in the process of preparation of the high-level segment of this COP. Changes proposed were also intended to strengthen the relationship with the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and the role of CMS plays in its implementation, especially in regards of migratory species conservation. We also like the proposal from Brazil to first see amendments in the resolution and then, if needed, to go into the contact group. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, EU. Do we have any further requests for the floor from parties? Seychelles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to speak. In regards to the document before us, 17, Seychelles would like to confirm that we are fully subscribing to include ecological connectivity at the apex goal level in the post-2020 biodiversity framework. We would also like to confirm that the Seychelles National Focal Point to the CBD is fully informed and has subscribed to this proposal, which is being put forward by CMS. We will be actively engaged in the next open-ended working group in Rome. And depending on the outcome of the discussion, we are happy to join the contact group. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Seychelles. Do you have any further requests for the floor from parties? I see none. We shall now take Togo.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. C'est la première fois que le Togo prend la parole et comme d'autres partis, nous remercions le gouvernement de l'Inde pour l'organisation parfaite et nous remercions aussi la présidence. Le Togo se réjouit de la pertinence du thème de cette COP. Les espèces migratrices connectent la planète et ensemble nous les accueillons chez elles. Et ce thème est aussi en cohérence avec la vision 2050 des Nations Unies qui est celle de vivre en harmonie avec la nature. Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs, vers la fin de cette année, ça a été dit et tout de suite, nous avons suivi la présentation. Le monde adoptera un nouveau plan, la vision 2000, un nouveau plan sur la biodiversité, le cadre mondial sur la biodiversité post-2020, et qui est aussi de vivre en harmonie avec la nature, avec la vision 2050, excusez-moi, des Nations Unies. Pour venir ici dans ce pays, j'avais l'obligation d'avoir le passeport pour ma propre sécurité, pour celle de ceux avec qui je vais voyager, pour même le pays qui va m'accueillir. Le passeport est bien évidemment le visa. Mais hier, Son Excellence, Monsieur le Premier ministre de ce pays, de l'Inde, a prononcé une phrase très importante qui m'a particulièrement intéressé. Il disait, je cite, « Les espèces migratives voyagent sans passeport ni visa et nous avons la responsabilité de les accueillir chez nous. » Fin de citation. C'est fort comme message. Et le défi qui nous attend est de savoir comment accueillir un hôte qui n'a pas besoin de passeport ni visa. C'est possible si vraiment ce hôte est l'un de nos meilleurs amis. Et c'est pour ça que le Togo se réjouit que le CMS a créé un comité pour suivre le débat sur l'adoption du nouveau cadre pour 2020. Et pour nous, le cadre mondial pour 2020 est déjà une ambition fédératrice. Et toutes les autres conventions qui travaillent sur la biodiversité devaient s'y retrouver. Et que nous ne devons pas perdre de vue que souvent dans nos pays, les cadres institutionnels ne sont pas toujours adéquats. Et donc, il y a beaucoup de rapports, beaucoup de documents élaborés, et qu'on ait une vision où, à partir du cadre mondial post-2020 dans sa mise en œuvre, qu'on puisse aller ensemble en élaborant les documents sur la CMS, sur la CITES, puisqu'ensemble, tous ces documents, en réalité, travaillent le plus souvent sur les mêmes écosystèmes, sur les mêmes espèces. Et donc, la contribution que la CMS pourrait avoir, c'est de faire en sorte que dans l'évaluation de ce cadre mondial post-2020, qu'on ait en même temps une évaluation de la mise en œuvre de la Convention CMS. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Togo. Let's have South Asia Cooperative Environment Program.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I would like to thank India for its initiative and leadership for proposing this resolution. There are many important components incorporated into this resolution. One of its components is collaboration. It is important, is highlighted in this resolution. Of course, collaboration is very important in protection of biodiversity and migratory species. While we are talking about ecological connectivity, it requires enhanced collaboration at the national, regional, and international levels. At the national level, we need collaboration among states, among different areas, and also we need to have collaboration at the regional and sub-regional level. The resolution recognizes the importance of collaboration at the national and also international level, but there is no reflection on regional cooperation and collaboration. Therefore, I request the parties to recognize also the importance of regional cooperation and protection of biodiversity and migratory species. Thank you.
Born Free Foundation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Born Free strongly supports efforts by CMS outlined in Document 17 to influence the development and adoption of a strong and ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework in which ecological connectivity and other key CMS themes are suitably reflected, and also the development of the Gandhinagar Declaration. Document 17, Addendum 2, pinpoints missing issues as well as inadequately addressed CMS priorities in the current zero drought framework. In addition to promoting ecological connectivity as both a standalone target and a component of other relevant targets, Born Free encourages CMS, its parties, daughter agreements and partner organisations to promote the following. The need to ensure that the continued use of biodiversity is truly sustainable, consistent with international commitments, and appropriately regulated, monitored and enforced. Strengthened recognition of the importance of international cooperation and reference to other multilateral environmental agreements within national biodiversity strategies and action plans. Increased efforts to address both the direct and indirect drivers of biodiversity loss as identified in the 2019 Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Greater recognition of species conservation objectives within the framework, including the addition of a target addressing species conservation status, and recognition of the importance of animal culture and social complexity, ecosystem restoration, and consideration of communities and livelihoods as key components for positive conservation outcomes. We also recommend that the principle that the next generation of targets should be established in close consultation with government policy and indicator experts to ensure that targets are measurable and scalable across countries should also apply to policy and indicator experts operating at the regional scale, including in relevant bodies of the CMS daughter agreements, as reflected in Annex 3 of Document 17, Addendum 2. We have provided comments on the Gandhinagar Declaration and look forward to its further development. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
WCS.
Thank you, Chair, and I will be mercifully brief. I would like to thank the Secretariat for all of its work and initiative on this, the Government of India, and the members of the working group that worked on this, which I was very pleased and honored to be part of. This is tremendously important. And the inclusion of ecological connectivity in the post-2020 framework is vitally important for the work of this convention. I would add also is an indicator of some kind on migratory species, which will help draw attention to CMS and hopefully funding as well. I won't go into the other issues. I, in fact, have been involved from the beginning, including having a conversation with Bradley Chambers on this in Manila at COP12. So I think it's wonderful that this is going forward. We will be at the open-ended working group in Rome and will be pleased to help promote the Gandhinagar Declaration there as well. I won't go into specifics, but if established and if it's possible, we would be happy to join any contact group. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your comments. Please send your written comments to the Secretariat on the proposed decisions in the annex to document 17, and then the Government of India, of course, will avail the draft resolution that will be delivering the Gandhinagar Declaration, and then we shall have an opportunity to look at it and see how to proceed. We shall now move to agenda item 18, synergies and partnerships. Let me invite the Secretariat to introduce document 18.
Thank you very much, Chair. I now present document 18, which provides an update on the implementation of resolution 11.10 Rev COP12 on synergies and partnerships with regard to the Secretariat's efforts to promote CMS issues in the UN system, to engage in processes initiatives under the UN Environment Programme, and to strengthen synergies with other multilateral environmental agreements, including through the liaison group of biodiversity-related conventions. The document also describes the activities that have been carried out to implement the provisions of the resolution with regards to strengthening the collaboration between the CMS family and the civil society. These include the notification which was issued by the Secretariat in August 2018 to invite parties, other governments and stakeholders to consider and make recommendations on how to improve and strengthen the relationship between the CMS family and civil society. Inputs were received from the governments of Australia, Poland, and from the Wild Migration, also on behalf of BirdLife International, Ocean Care, and Wildlife Conservation Society. All submissions were compiled and presented to the 49th meeting of the Standing Committee in October 2018, which welcomed the proposal of this group of NGOs to produce a reporting format for civil society, as well as a review on the value of CMS to NGO partners for the consideration of this very meeting. Following the decision of the Standing Committee, these NGOs established a civil society project steering group to lead the work and develop a review contained in Information Document 33, which is based on information gathered through an interview and questionnaire process carried out in 2019, which involved 12 CMS formal NGO partners. The draft amendments to Resolution 11.10 Rev COP12 contained in Annex 1 reflect some of the suggestions and recommendations proposed by the review, proposed by the NGOs, as well as the interest to promote the participation of NGOs, people and local communities in CMS processes, and to cooperate with other conventions in the further development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Annex 2 contains proposed decisions aimed at setting up a process for a special accreditation to be conferred to those NGOs willing to play a key role in the implementation of the Convention and provide a regular and significant contribution to the further development and application of its policies, as well as technical and scientific tools. Such a process would build on the experience of other conventions, such as the Ramsar Convention, and take account of the recommendations of the review contained in Annex 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. Before I open the floor, let me invite Sue Lieberman from WCS to give us the civil society perspective on this.
Thank you very much, Chair. Sorry you have to hear my voice again. This intervention is on behalf of WCS, BirdLife International, the International Crane Foundation, Born Free Foundation, Ocean Care, and IFAW. And I won't summarize, repeat the excellent summary from the Secretariat, but would like to greatly thank the Secretariat for all its collaboration in this project. And I would like to very briefly discuss the review that she mentioned, Conservation Collaboration, Strengthening the Relationship Between CMS and its NGO Partners, which you can find in Information Document 33. The review highlights the contributions and commitments of NGOs to the conservation of migratory species and the implementation of CMS at the national and international levels. As you know, of course, NGOs, national and international, bring scientific expertise and knowledge, skills, expertise, collaboration, on-the-ground initiation, and funding initiatives and funding to the conservation of CMS-listed species. NGOs have historically demonstrated considerable commitment to migratory species and the CMS family, and this review, I recognize it's a long document, but it reveals how the partner NGOs perceive this relationship. For the first time, the information quantifies the combined financial commitment of partner NGOs to conservation of CMS species, and it is more than $20 million a year. The information was collected through an interview and questionnaire process during a 6-week period starting in June 2019, and the participating NGOs represent a spectrum of perspectives. The review intentionally remains policy neutral, and I want to stress with tremendous thanks to Margie Prideaux, who's unfortunately, due to the fires in Australia, unable to be with us today. We, the NGOs that I mentioned earlier, all recommend that parties adopt the amendments to Resolution Conf 1110, Rev COP 12, in Annex 1 to Document 18, and the draft decisions in Annex 2 in Document 18. In the full report, there are 20 recommendations which you'll be happy I will not read to you now, but we believe that through the adoption of the draft decisions and resolution amendments in Doc 18, we will all together be able to continue this dialogue between now and COP14 and continue and enhance our close collaboration. In particular, some of the recommendations, just a few, are to commit to developing shared work programs between partner NGOs and the Secretariat, which we think will tremendously be helpful, to pursue a process for inclusion of connectivity and migratory species conservation in the post-2020, and that's already happening. We want to establish a regular circular of NGO expertise and availability to help parties and the Secretariat, and to help establish additional capacity within the Secretariat, focusing on joint fundraising. And we're committed to that, and we think we can go a long way with that. In addition, we collectively strongly recommend the development and updating of the State of the World's Migratory Species, as was mentioned earlier, to be incorporated into the CMS budget and linked to an indicator in the post-2020 framework. In conclusion, NGOs are well-placed and highly committed to assist with all efforts to implement the Convention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, WCS, on behalf of all the civil society organizations, and we appreciate the work you do to support the implementation of the agreement. I will open the floor for any quick comments on Document 18. Switzerland.
Thank you, Chair. Switzerland thanks the Secretariat for the proposed draft amendments to Resolution 11.10 Ref COP12, which we support. We want to emphasize once again the importance of focusing on synergies between the biodiversity-related multilateral environmental agreements wherever possible, and knowledge management is one of these possibilities. Switzerland therefore suggests to highlight the importance of knowledge management at the national level in paragraph 22 of Decision 11.10. The data reporting tool for MEAs, DART, which was presented yesterday during a side event, is a user-friendly, elegant, simple and cost-effective data management tool which has a huge potential to simplify the elaboration of national reports by parties, by increasing access to relevant national information, by strengthening collaboration between national focal points of biodiversity-related conventions, and therefore with promoting the use of synergies at the national level. Switzerland therefore suggests mentioning the data reporting tool for MEAs in paragraph 22, Resolution 11.10. It reads as follows: urges parties to establish close collaboration at the national level between the focal point of the CMS and the focal points of other relevant conventions in order for governments to develop coherent and synergetic approaches across the conventions and increase effectiveness of national efforts, for example, by developing national biodiversity working groups to coordinate the work of focal points of relevant MEAs and other stakeholders inter alia through relevant measures of NB-subs, harmonized knowledge management and national reporting by making use of the data reporting tool DART, developed by the UN Environmental Programme, as well as through adoption of coherent national positions in respect of each MEA. We will send you this suggestion by writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Switzerland. Let's have Australia.
Thank you, Chair. Australia appreciates the substantial consideration that partner NGOs have given to enhancing their recognition and participation in this convention. Australia still believes that an important first step is for partner NGOs to have the opportunity to formally submit a written report to COP, outlining their activities as relevant to CMS and migratory species issues. We recognise that partner NGOs had the ability to provide verbal reports in the past. However, with the increasing workload at COPs and time constraints, written reports, in our view, are the best way forward. This would align NGOs with parties who currently only have the option of providing written reports. We note that the proposed decision suggests establishing an intersessional working group to explore options for additional participation status for partner NGOs. We recognise the potential value of such an approach. However, we believe that final agreement must be taken by all parties at a COP and not be delegated or mandated to standing committee. If there is additional participation status identified, then this could form a significant change to the current operation of the Convention and its subsidiary bodies, and would need all parties to consider and support such a change. It must be recognised that the obligations arising from CMS fall to national governments to implement, and this is why membership to CMS subsidiary bodies is restricted to parties. Parties must be in control of making the decisions, as they are the ones who will be required to implement them. Naturally, CMS and its subsidiary bodies are open to observer participation, and this participation has been welcomed in the past. We are cognisant that any potential changes to this situation and associated ramifications must be well understood by all parties before being agreed. Thank you.
Thank you, Australia. Let's have European Union.
Thank you, Chair. The EU and its member states welcome the cooperation with other UN entities, including biodiversity-related conventions and NGOs, especially in relation to the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We take note of the executive summary and recommendations of the review conservation collaboration, strengthening the relationship between CMS and its NGO partners when the world needs us most, in Annex 3, which is based on the full review contained in Infant Doc 33. We acknowledge the very important role NGO partners have in implementing the Convention and support the further work as proposed in draft decision. However, we consider proposed recommendations in Annex 3 to be a starting point for further deliberations. As regards the engagement with indigenous peoples, youth groups and local communities, we are of the view that the Secretariat should first investigate the options rather than immediately taking actions. Therefore, we suggest some changes to the text as drafted before supporting the adoption of the proposed amendments in the Resolution 11.10 Rev COP12 contained in Annex 1 and draft decisions contained in Annex 2. The EU and its member states will submit the proposed changes in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, EU. Let's have New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. New Zealand welcomes the active engagement of the CMS Secretariat in promoting CMS issues across the UN system during the last triennium, and the increased cooperation among the secretariats of the biodiversity-related agreements at this critical time in the development of the post-2020 goals. We thank the partner NGOs for undertaking the review. There is obviously a lot of work that has gone into this. We value the important contribution of NGOs and civil society into the work of CMS. We also see value in promoting the participation of Indigenous peoples and local communities. We are generally supportive of the draft resolution but have some questions, in particular on operative paragraphs 5, 6 and 6 bis. We also cannot find Annex 4, which is referred to in paragraph 5 of the draft resolution. New Zealand is interested in the idea of special accreditation for NGOs as set out in the draft decision, but we are unsure exactly what this would mean in practice. We note that parties have distinct roles and responsibilities under CMS by virtue of signing and ratifying the Convention. Because NGOs and civil society are not party to the Convention and therefore not legally bound, their roles and responsibilities are and should be different. We think this distinction has potential to create opportunities for NGOs in their participation in CMS. However, we would not want to see special accreditation status as weakening the opportunities for parties, for example, with respect to capacity building. So while we are supportive of further investigating the idea of special accreditation of NGOs, in terms of process, we think a decision on the issue would be more appropriately made by COP14 rather than intersessionally by the Standing Committee. We also support the concept raised by Australia of partner NGOs providing written reports to CMS. We think that this would be a useful addition to the process. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. Let's have Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the preparation of this document and also the comments regarding the document of conservation collaboration. Regarding the changes that were presented in Annex 1, we'd just like to propose a small change to one of the preambular paragraphs in page 9, where it says that it recognizes the importance of ongoing cooperation among secretariats of biodiversity-related conventions through the Biodiversity Liaison Group, and then it says to develop and implement a post-2020. I think it will reflect more adequately what is going on to support the development and implementation of the post-2020, since it's not the Biodiversity Liaison Group that is developing the post-2020 biodiversity framework. So my suggestion will be to change it to support the development and implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Please submit all those comments to the Secretariat so that they can be incorporated. I want to encourage all other delegates, while making submissions on things where they will submit written comments, to at least attempt to bring out the contents of the comments they intend to submit in here, so that we can at least have general view of what they intend to submit before it is submitted. We've come to the end of the morning session. We are 5 minutes late. I still see requests for the floor from Ocean Care and Young Naturalist, but we've run out of time. Ocean Care, can you use 0.5 of a minute?
Distinguished Chair and delegates, my colleague Sue Lieberman has already summarized some conclusions of the report, Conservation Collaboration, and beautifully voiced recommendations to be considered, as well as support to the draft resolution and draft decision. But just one more thought. In the last couple of days, we've heard many statements on the importance of collaboration and the need to better involve local communities and civil society. And we note that CMS is an NGO-friendly MEA with lots of benefits arising from that standing of civil society. But as with any other topic, there's always room for improvement. Taking note of some of the interventions made being skeptical and preferring to more or less keep the status quo, we are of the opinion that the current biodiversity crisis is the best proof enough for the need to explore new grounds. The challenges upon us are of such large scale that it needs our combined efforts, which include a further evolved understanding of mutual collaboration. Thank you.
I will give Young Naturalists Network also half a minute, and then we close.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, Young Naturalist Networks like to propose one thing, that in different UN system, we are following that strengthening the different stakeholders. That means we have a particular suggestion on that to follow the major group systems under the UN resolutions and the different resolutions in UN under UNEP. So we will like to give that our statement or suggestion to Secretariat in written format to follow the major group system. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Let me invite the Secretariat to make administrative announcements before we adjourn. Secretariat.
Thank you, Chair. At 1 o'clock, the Credentials Committee will meet in Conference Room 3, which is up on the first floor of this building. From 1:15, the Friends of the Chair group to discuss the COP appointed councillors issue will meet in Working Group Room 4 in the Exhibition Hall 1, where the side events are as well. The Budget Committee will meet in Working Group 3 in the Exhibition Hall, but I'm afraid I haven't been given the time for that.
No, you're saying after.
I wonder if the chair of the Budget Committee has that time. No. Okay.
Chair of the Budget Committee.
Thank you. I think it's only fair that people have the opportunity to grab something to eat. It is, after all, lunch. So could we meet at 1 in the room as was assigned? Thank you.
Okay, at 1 p.m. then in Working Group Room 3 of the Exhibition Hall for the Budget Committee.
All right, we are 9 minutes late, so in the afternoon we have to catch up with time, but this brings us to the end of the morning session. The meeting is adjourned. Enjoy your lunch.